Okay, today's talk is, well, first of all, thank everybody for coming, Sasha for inviting me, the whole New Earth crew, everybody showed up, everybody that worked on this, but especially the Akasha crew who behind the scenes have been making this whole thing happen, so thank you for being here. The Gaian Superorganism, what does that mean? When I was young, I used to experiment with things they called drugs, not to get high, but I was curious about where consciousness would go, what it was about. And I remember one night, I was particularly in a very deep cognitive state, and I thought, God, I felt like I had the answer to everything. I knew it. I go, wow, I've got to write this down. So when I wake up in the morning, I know what it is. So I did. I found pencil and paper, wrote the thing down, and I'm up the next day. I'm going around and go, fuck, I wrote the answer down. I'm going to go get it. And I pull it out, and it says, we are all one. I'm thinking, but I really felt it that night. And we are. And basically, I spent most of my life actually trying to find the evidence of it because I knew it. I'd already felt it in my heart that it was there. Trying to find a connection between everything in a society that's basically very disconnected from nature. So I'll read a couple quotes here. It might be hard to see this particular slide. I noticed when we put it up, but it's just some gray old buildings. And the religious historian, Mircea Eliade, it should be said at once that the completely profane world, the wholly desacralized cosmos, is a recent discovery in the history of the human spirit. For the non-religious men of the modern age, the cosmos has become opaque, inert, mute. It transmits no message. It holds no cipher. And to quote Rudolf Steiner, one of my favorite scientific philosophers, these achievements of modern technology have nothing to do with the true need of gaining insight into nature. To observe the processes of nature with a view to subjecting its forces to the service of technology is something quite different from seeking profound insight into the order of nature with the help of these processes. True science is only present where the human spirit seeks satisfaction for its need without an extraneous purpose. So the human spirit, that's what we're seeking the purpose of. So Gaia hypothesis, it's been around for years. I caught this stuff back when I was young. James Lovelock, just that Earth is a complex homeostatic entity. These different spheres, biosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere. It's maintaining stability. He was a scientist. I guess NASA asked him to help them figure out some way they could determine if there might be life on other planets. And he thought potentially through atmospheric gases and monitoring that. And this is where he developed this whole theory. Because if we look at the Earth, the atmospheric composition is constant despite all this activity, decaying animals, gases. Ocean salinity remains the same, despite all the ocean salts, or all the earth salts washing in from all the ocean or the rivers around the world. And the surface temperature remains generally constant, within livable range, as we know. There was earlier things, of course, we know the whole Gaia Earth thing, it goes back into ancient history. Most cultures had that concept. But from a scientific perspective, one of the first people that really tried to do it precisely was Vladimir Vernadsky, head of the Russian Academy of Sciences, a brilliant man. So he thought Earth is a living system, 3 spheres, each with its own laws, what higher spheres dominating the lower. So the lowest sphere, the abiotic, that's what they think of as the minerals, the waters, the air, everything that's technically not living according to biological processes, something that can reproduce it. Then we have the biosphere, which is the mass on Earth of everything that's alive, which actually constitutes quite a bit, as we're going to see, far more than we may have even known, because they're discovering more and more life all the time and more complex types, and the lines are getting blurred. And then there's what he called the noosphere, which has been used by several people. Actually, Teilhard de Chardin came up with that to some sort of omega religious point. And Vernadsky and de Chardin were friends, but he meant something quite different. He meant the impact of human activities upon the biosphere, which are actually driven by our consciousness. So it's like the collective effect of human consciousness upon the biosphere. So 3 of those together. And now take a look here. So where does consciousness actually start? Here's some slime mold. They lay out oat flakes and the pattern of the subway stations of the Tokyo subway. And the slime mold actually lays out the pattern of the Tokyo subways. And now we have a slime mold solving a maze to get food. And so where actually does intelligence arise? We think humans kind of arrogant. Giovanni Borelli, he was in the Accademia del Cimento, same, with Galileo, and he was one who came up with the biomechanical concept of animals. They're just machines, right? Only humans, have consciousness. The rest of them are just some sort of mechanical machines we have to take apart and figure out how they work. So where does it start? Jagadish Chandra Bose, absolutely brilliant Indian scientist. It might be hard to read on there. It says, the man who befriended plants and metals. Now, Bose actually invented microwaves. The microwave technology in use today was invented by him in the 1890s, and he refused to patent it because he said it was basically the patrimony of the world, right? He said inventors should give stuff away. That's their point, is to bring the stuff out for humans. But his main thing was on plants. Plant motions. He invented a thing called the crescograph, and he would be experimenting with plant reactions, and he was making more and more sensitive machines with like platinum and gold springs, and he was getting anomalous readings in them. He was drugging the plants just to see, like chloroform, ether, just things he could put on there and see what sort of reactions they would get, or if he could deaden reactions. And to check out these readings, he started testing metals. So what we see here, these 3 little charts, these are what we call response curves. So basically, if you take a piece of meat, like a steak, just as an example, you run a current through it, have it up on the oscilloscope, and you put something like chloroform or ether on it, you get what we call a characteristic response curve. And that's what we see in the first one. It goes along, and then something happens. The second one is plants, right? Plants have a characteristic response curve, just like animals do. But curiously enough, so do metals. So as Bose noted, the response phenomena in plants is intermediate between those of animals and minerals. So what we consider the biological response actually arises in the mineral state. So what's all affecting the mineral state? Giorgio Picardi, the chemist of the sun. This guy was amazing. He was the chair of the chemistry department at University of Florence back in the 50s and 60s. Considered controversial because it was a very interesting experiment. Basically, chemical reactions plotted against solar cycles and geomagnetic activity. This is all in his book, The Chemical Basis of Medical Climatology. Very rare book, but you can find some bad Xeroxes online of it. So basically what we're looking at is he would take bismuth chloride and mix it into water and just basically get a colloidal precipitate, and they would time it. And they did this over 10 years around the world, in in Florence, in Russia, down on Kerguelen Island, down in the South Pacific, the French island just north, west of Australia there. I'm sure you know where it's at, Sir John. And they did it inside Faraday cages, outside of Faraday cages, with structured water, without structured water, using different things. And these are the best graphs without going in detail, but basically what we see is correlation between 2 different chemical tests, which are basically similar, and Wolf number. Now, Wolf number is a sunspot count, and this is showing rotation. So basically, the timing of the colloidal solutions is happening according to the activity of the sun. But also, he showed blood sedimentation and chemical tests. Well, they also did geomagnetic field, so it reacted both the sun and the geomagnetic field. And along with this, they were doing blood coagulation experiments with chicken blood. You know, you gotta love scientists. They do this for like 10 years. They got a little drop of blood, and they got somebody with a little glass thing, and they stick it in, and they're counted out until how many, like, you know, how much time passed until it coagulated, and then they graph it. So the data analysis is where we get something out of this, and basically the blood coagulation followed exactly the timing of the colloidal solution preparations, which means that our systems are reacting directly from the mineral state on up to the geocosmic activity, which is happening all around us. And there's one other interesting thing, and this gets a bit more complex. We're going to cover a lot of ground, so I'm just going to kind of surface cover a number of things to try to give a bigger overview here. But he was doing these experiments where he would, well, he took the 9 years of data for this and graphed it out, and there was this anomalous dip in the readings, and what was that? And he tried to figure it out, so he was doing all this study. And now Earth, let's say we're here at the galactic center, and we're looking out the solar system, and the solar system's tilted like this, 60 degrees, whatever, to the galactic plane. There's the sun. Earth is going around like this, and it's in an ellipse, so it slows up, speeds up, slows down. So when it's coming up around, when Earth is coming around on March 21st, pointing straight at the galactic center and going the fastest it does through the whole cycle, is when they were getting this anomalous drop, which means that we're connected to the galactic center as well. So, which is in an electric universe, we know that that's where all the energy feeds out of. And here's another interesting one. Lily Kalisko, she was a significant associate of Rudolf Steiner's, a medical doctor. And Rudolf Steiner asked her to find the connection between ancient alchemical thought and modern science. So we look up in the upper right here, you know, we see like gold in the sun, silver in the moon, iron Mars, as they go on, you know, copper, Venus, lead, Saturn. So what we see in the upper left here, we see blotter paper basically turned into a little cylinder and put into a petri dish with dissolved metallic salts and acid, aqua regia solution. And it rises up and dries. So these particular experiments here are some that were done during a solar eclipse in 1936. So basically, the two lower ones on the left, we see silver nitrate by day, because silver nitrate goes along with the moon. It rises up part way. At night, after the sun goes down, it rises again. That's the second picture. So because gold in the sun, so she mixed gold chloride and silver nitrate together. That's the third one from the right. I'm sorry, third one from the left. And so that was basically before the eclipse, right? It's basically a line, but when the moon went in front of the sun, the silver took over and rose up above the gold line. So this is a simplistic sort of thing. She did 40 years of experiments on this. I did a documentary on her lead Saturn research about 5 years ago. What's interesting about this is, because we showed Picardy, you know, we're getting the reactions from the galactic center. That's the standard model of the universe, heliocentric. This works geocentrically. This is as though Earth is in the center, is how these things are reacting. And people say, well, what is it, quantum entanglement? Well, what would cause only gold to be affected by the sun and only silver to be affected by the moon? Where in the quantum stuff is that? I can't find it anywhere. So modern science has no explanations for these, but after 40 years of research, and we'll come back to her. I just wanted to introduce that early on. So where does life arise? Where is things coming from? There's a number of people that had concepts of spontaneous generation. Andrew Cross, he's quite well known. He had these Acarus insects appeared out of volcanic pumice that he was treating with acid and electricity. Quite interesting. And Michael Faraday actually reproduced those experiments, but they're very little known about them these days. But then I found just recently weird hairy microbes discovered on volcanoes soon after eruption. And one of the scientists was actually quoted, he said, "These organisms apparently come out of nowhere." So, because in science, everything had to come from somewhere. First there was nothing, then it blew up into dumb matter, and then somehow, by luck, it clumped together, and then somehow, some other dumb luck, some single microbe, and then it like started spreading, and now we got all this stuff. Or there's some sort of spontaneous generation out of space. There's some sort of field of activity. You know, as Rupert Sheldrake would call it, the morphogenetic fields, which can then evolve and process. But so it's possible of spontaneous generation. And in Charles Littlefield, he was. A lot of people talk about Emoto. You know, Dr. Emoto. If you know about his work with the water, yeah, it's fantastic work. Did you hear about Charles Littlefield? Like back in the 30s, he was doing far more fantastic stuff for a long time. Not only crystallizing visualizations and visualization of the crystals, but actually creating life and photographing it in the process. So here's a little, the one over on the right is a little octopus that he did. And there was others, Henry Bastian, Morley Martin. He was also developing things along these lines. But I liked Baron Albrecht von Herzl said, what lives may die, but nothing is created dead. So everything, rocks, soil, everything was all alive at one point. And here we'll see how close we can see this. You see little tiny things moving around on screen. So this comes from, Dr. Young was talking today about Antoine Béchamp's work. He's far more eloquent in it, but I just wanted to touch on it briefly. The microzymas that appear right in azoic rock, basically molecular granulations. So it's not abiogenic, the rock, but these are anatomical elements that persist in everything. As Dr. Young noted, even they survive cremation, right? They're everywhere. But these are the cause of disease in this thesis, right? That germs are chemical byproducts. So these things come, these tiny little somatids, or he called them, Béchamp called them microzymas. They actually form into germs and morph into different forms. So basically, low oxygen cellular environment causes that. You start going acid, you get out of your alkaline, and that starts the morbid changes of what's actually good in your system. So these are the same things that actually repair your cells and build up cells. So it can go either way. It depends on the terrain, how you keep your body. And this is why, instead of Pasteur and the germ theory coming from without, there's the terrain theory that we actually create these things. And of course you can be infected from outside. We know that because toxic environments can kill, but still, the main thing is within us. As Béchamp said, germs seek their natural habitat, diseased tissue, rather than being the cause of diseased tissue. And then there's Gaston Naessens, which I'll just briefly go over since it was covered earlier. Right, so he called the same microzymas somatids. And if we look up here, the 1, 2, 3, normally that's the cycle that these retain inside the body. The somatid spores, double spores, and they go back. And they stay there until the system gets out of chemical balance. Then they start morphing on into all these bacterial and yeast-like forms. So, and then over on the right, we have Wilhelm Reich's bions. Now, Wilhelm Reich, he discovered what he called the orgone, the biological energy in the atmosphere. But part of the research that led to that was his research on what he called bions, where he was basically, he would take sand, autoclave it, keep it in a sterile environment and liquid, and it would actually start creating these little pulsing vesicles, which would then basically turn into little like protozoa and bacteria, and he called them the T bacilli. So again, slightly different approach, but he was still seeing this pleomorphic state within it. Things are coming out of inert matter, forming into biological things, and in certain states cause the diseases. And just to show even modern science is starting to get there, they still, they like to keep their boundaries up, but here's life's biochemical networks could have formed spontaneously. Wow, what a surprise. A spark for life, lightning strikes, create minerals crucial for early organisms. So this is a fulgurite, so what they find is basically natural processes are creating these. And of course we know even from looking at sort of spectrographs of asteroids and things like that, comets, there's organic molecules all through the universe. And here's the standard tree of life. I wanted to put this up just so get a little bit of reference. We have, because we're going to be talking about the microbiome, which contains 4 things. Archaea, which is at the top, used to be called archaeobacteria, but they have different structure. Then there's bacteria, and then there's the eukaryota. Eukaryote just means we've got cells with nucleuses. So everything's over there, fungus, plants, animals. But what they're finding is the lines are actually blurring between these. The communication, the scientists like to think that these things are all real distinct lines. But as we can see, there's a lot of pleomorphism down at the cellular and subcellular level, and they're finding now there's a lot of crosstalk amongst all these different species between, well, of course, viruses aren't on here because they say they're not alive, but we'll see if they're alive or not. They're certainly up to something for being dead. And but I just put that tree up for reference, and then you find in the science world these days, scientists discover a whole new kingdom of life. They're finding things now, the more they look, things that just don't fit on the tree. And here we contain microbes so deeply weird, they alter the very tree of life. And this is why I like the bacteria are so small, they are on the cusp of being impossible, which is, of course, down where the microzymas and the somatids, the bions, which you need specialized microscopes to see. You can't see them definitely not electron microscopes. You have to see these things in the living form, in vivo. So we'll look, bacteria. A couple pictures here. Up on the right, altruistic bacteria. When they poison bacteria, the green ones, they're poisoning them with a dye. So the first bacteria that start doing it, they absorb as much as they can to save the other bacteria in the colony. There's altruism operating at this level. And then the lower left, we see electric bacteria. So the bacteria actually use electric charge, connect themselves up, and they'll reach out, they'll actually grab onto food and pull it in, and they can reach up to the surface of the earth and pull in oxygen. So I didn't realize we're missing some of the picture on this, but no biggie. So yeah, bacteria have a sense of touch, that they know exactly what's happening. They've been discovering all sorts of new species of bacteria in our guts, many of which are electrogenic. And now they use brain-like bursts of electricity to communicate. And just while we're looking at bacteria, there's bacteria that break down plastic, metabolize plastic. Bacteria now metabolize oil. And radiation bacteria that use radionucleotides.
Yeah, we can hypercharge them.
We can hypercharge them, that's great. Yeah, I knew you'd know about that stuff. So we're going to put a lot of these into a bigger picture. I just want to cover some things. And here, bacteria reveals strong individuality when navigating maze. So even though these things are basically clones, all the same supposedly, but they all act differently, even at this level. And basically bacteria, when they form into biofilms, they start thinking together, then they break up and go into a singular form. So there's intelligence happening at all levels of the environment. And here's the archaea, which most people never heard of. We have them all through our system. That's what activates our immune system. What they call it the forgotten players in the microbiome. Mystery microbes of the sea. They're equal in weight to all the fish in the ocean. What they do, because there's fish dying every day, as you would in the ocean, right? Where are they going to put them? They're not going to bury them or anything. So they rot, put off a lot of ammonia. These things eat ammonia. They metabolize it all through, so they're integral to it. And they find them in they're extremophiles. So black smokers at the bottom of the ocean, they can survive, super high temperatures, super cold, extremophiles. So they're basically, that's why termites have them. That's why termites can metabolize wood, because they've got archaea in them, water treatment plants. So they're basically all through. Then we have fungi, which we know quite a wide range. So, could they be the dominant life form on the Earth? That's one of the considerations. So, they definitely communicate cooperatively with plants. What we call the wood wide web, the mycelium networks, the hyphae, the little threads they wrap everywhere on every plant and communicate, very much like the avatar planet. But it's really happening. We're just not aware of it because our human ego sort of separates us a bit from that level of consciousness. I like this, lightning makes mushrooms multiply. And actually around the world, there's a number of legends about basically magic mushrooms and things and lightning bringing them in. That's from the Maori up to Siberia and stuff. It's those links are there. And I've got a book somewhere in my library, which is sadly in storage these days, but it was called Toads and Toadstools. And it was basically about the etymology of the words. Toads and toadstools are basically similar in words all over the world, but there's no connection between them except for certain psychedelic compounds, like 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine and things. That's only so who knew that all over the world in all the ancient languages, that there was this connection between toads and toadstools? So anyway, they're very interested. Maybe they told them. It's interesting. Fungi and humans are very similar. They're not like plants. They're like our metabolic system turned inside out. They put out enzymes into the environment and then dissolve and pull things in that way. And our genomes are so similar, our system sometimes doesn't even know where we stop, the fungi comes in. We have a lot, in the microbiome, a lot of what's called commensal, which means that they're just sort of there, taking space, often so. And Candida is one of them. So when our system gets out of whack, then it can take over and mimic all sorts of diseases. But there's a new one, Candida auris, which they're saying now, deadly super fungus, C. auris, killing half the people who contract it within 90 days. And to quote a scientist or doctor says, it's like a creature from the Black Lagoon. And and they're actually in certain hospitals, they've had to completely tear these places out, ceilings, floors, walls, completely re-sterilize the stuff and put it back in because they can't get rid of it. And Sue Gray this morning, she was talking about the potential of the fungus in the cereal that they're mixing in, cereal dust they're mixing in with the 1080 poison and they're putting down there. And she was talking about the, with the cowrie dieback, which is a fungus. And my friend Anna, who's from down there, she was telling me that she heard somebody actually pointing out that this fungus is actually moving upstream against currents towards the cowrie, like it's got some sort of sentience. It's curious stuff, but part of the picture. Then viruses, they're kind of fun. Most abundant and deadly biological entities on Earth. And people don't realize we have what we call the virome. We've got more viruses in us than anything else. We can't live without viruses. They're extremely essential in many ways. One thing, what they call the phages, most viruses are killing bacteria. So there's this constant thing going on. They're doing it in the sea too. There's viruses all through the sea. There's viruses all through us. There are viruses in our DNA, the non-coding DNA, which actually gives a lot of messenger signals and things, not for coding, but for other regulatory. There's actually ancient viral structures. And so they're basically shaping the microbiome in our guts as they're doing this. And of course, they're not alive, remember? Excuse me. Here's what I found. Virus that makes human more stupid discovered. I didn't think they needed that, but it found to affect cognitive functions, including visual processing and spatial awareness. A rare example of a virus that's able to infect a completely different kingdom. So I wasn't sure exactly how they meant that, but anyway, let's take a look. So you see little tiny virus here, just to give you a thing of scale. That's a virus coming in to a bacteria, basically, or a cell, bacterial cell. And they've got there's different ones. These will have these little tiny proteins on the outside, which actually match the receptors on the outside of the cell. So they basically open the gate and slide in, and then take over the cell. So it's called virion, right? Virus is actually when it's inside the cell, building itself and making itself anew outside to burst back out. And these are the bacteriophages, the ones that really go after. So where do these things come from? They're not alive, as they say, but somehow they're all over, everywhere. As Professor Louis Villarreal, he's head of the virology department up at UC Irvine, and he's saying that eukaryotic life, life with nucleus in our cells, he says, may have been engineered by viruses. And humans can't gestate without viruses. There's a specific retrovirus the woman has to have in her system, or a fertilized egg will not stick to the womb wall. So we rely entirely. So this whole concept that we can just vaccinate against viruses, and they're pleomorphic, they're changing. We'll cover a bit more of this. There is no single thing. These things are constantly changing within the system. And here's viruses from space. Fred Hoyle, he came up because he noticed in some of the research that viral diseases seem to go along with solar cycles. So he proposed that viruses were being maybe in space and being pushed in by solar activity. He came under a lot of fire for being outspoken in that sense. But I don't think they're pushed in. There's a lot of Russian research, heliobiology, where they actually look at the solar activity. And here we see a few charts, one in the upper left, dynamics of morbidity with scarlet fever in Leningrad, and curve of solar activity. So one's this 1910 to 1955. So morbidity of scarlet fever followed the solar activity. It's hard to read here because I got light in my eyes. So the next one down, cholera, following that. Polio, up in the upper right, that's polio and geomagnetic activity. And lower right, scarlet fever in different geographic areas. So the one in the upper left is solar activity, the one in the bottom is where you are on Earth. So not only what the sun's doing, but where you're at on the Earth and the energy's coming in affects how these things are happening. Now, the sun's putting out, does X-ray flares, but there's still a lot of ultraviolet output, extreme ultraviolet. And what we find is the ultraviolet is 10 nanometers to 400 nanometers. The viruses are 20 to 400 nanometers. So it's very possible that these disease waves are actually, the terrain inside our system is actually transforming from the energetic input from the cosmos. And we've already seen from Picardi and Kalisko that we're intimately connected at that level with these energies flowing in. So microbiome of the world, it's everywhere we've looked. Geological, the deepest geological strata that they've dug, they find it. Ocean, in the ocean, under the ocean, everywhere. This stuff is everywhere. By microbiome, I mean bacteria, archaea, fungi, viruses. They're in the soils, very essential. They're in the plants. They're in the animals. It's in the atmosphere. So we'll take a look at some of these areas and see what's there. So endoterrestrials, the deep earth microbiome, barely living zombie bacteria in deep earth are made up of 15 to 23 billion tons of carbon, 385 times more than in every human on planet Earth put together. Now these things are so deep, there's no way in the world that they're getting any solar activity. If everything evolved out of one little squirt of something that appeared in a pool by chance, billions of years ago, how did this stuff get down all through there? It's like I say, it's everywhere. So bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, which are protists, simple like protozoa and things, but the bacteria and archaea dominate. So 70% of the bacteria and archaea live under the earth in deep geological strata. It's not even up here. And some live on the energy from rocks, process what's in there. And they say the life cycles are on geological time scales. Now, I suppose that depends on your philosophy, how long that stuff is. The creationist, it's only about 6,000 years old. I know some people like those billions of years and stuff. I'm probably around 1 million or 2 myself. We don't really know, but it's certainly not billions or hundreds of millions, this whole strata. That's another lecture. Living soils. We have to have the living soils. That's where our life comes from. There's this Mycobacterium vaccae. It boosts serotonin. When we have living soils, we actually feel good. It stimulates neurotransmitters within our system. So what does modern agriculture do? Actually, the whole nitrogen fertilizer industry came out of military research on explosives, how to fix nitrogen. Before that, they never had any sort of fertilizers like that. Won the Nobel Prize in like 1918 or something like that, and it became a big industry, but it's destroying the soils. The plants will go, they put more and more on, then you get more bugs, and they start engineering things. Because when you have living soil with all the microbiome operating through it, you have what they call carbonomics. So the plant's producing carbon and actually exchanging it with the bacteria and archaea in the soil, and the fungi is basically the communication between them. They're basically moving these things around. And soil has to keep temperature like humans. It stays within a certain range to stay living. Gets too cold, it dies. Gets too warm, it dies, just like we do. So like 1 gram of soil sediment contains 10 billion viruses. I just thought that was kind of interesting. So this diversity is the quality of immunity of the soil, and they're finding too that the no-till method works the best. Actually, even just plowing the field is really bad. You don't need to even plow the fields. There's been a number of no-till methods done so we can actually preserve the soils and move forward. There's movements in the States and in other countries working on this, trying to educate farmers. And looking at GMOs, right? And then you need the glyphosate on top of that. Glyphosate blocks pathways of enzymes necessary for protein synthesis in soil microbes. So, and we know the protein synthesis is all part, because the plants are part of our food chain, as we'll see. It's hard to say these talks, because some of the information at the end I really needed at the beginning. These things are kind of like circles. I didn't really know what order to put things in, so I just sort of stumbled along through them. Now the ocean microbiome, greater than 73% is shared with the human gut microbiome, despite the physiochemical differences between these 2 ecosystems. Right? And organisms in 1 milliliter of seawater, viruses, 10 million, bacteria, different bacteria, million, so let's say 1,100,000, protozoa, 4,000. So basically viruses are the main thing in seawater alone. Oceans charge up new theory of magnetism. We saw bacteria communicate with electric. This came out a couple of years ago. Earth's magnetic field perturbed by electric oceans. So there was some people were going along with thesis that it's possible that Earth's magnetic fields are actually caused by the oceans and the circulation, and it's not anything to do with a molten core that's too hot to hold the magnetic field anyway. And the atmosphere. Rain-making bacteria found around the world in troposphere. There's actually rivers of bacteria and viruses moving around the world in the upper troposphere. See viruses, lots of them falling from the sky. Mushrooms as rainmakers, how spores act as nuclei for raindrops. Now I know we'll hear a bit coming up about geoengineering. I know a lot of you are aware of that. So if we look at this first picture on the left here, this was actually drawn by Goethe, the great German poet-scientist. He followed the work of Luke Howard, who they actually corresponded at the time. Luke Howard gave the nomenclature to the clouds, stratus, cumulus, cirrus, and nimbus. And he called them the countenance of the sky, because it actually has the appearance, the feeling, there's something to it. And now we look up in the sky, and I've been watching the sky for many years. I was on air base in the 1970s. And I remember first actually jet trails I saw when I was young, back in the 60s. And I remember, I go, wow, what's that? And people saying, well, those are military jets from a military base near us, because they're flying so high, they're making these trails. Right, but now we see them all over the place. And I was studying Luke Howard's work on the clouds back in 1980s when I was running Borderland Sciences. And my brother lived up in Redding, California, in the Central Valley. I'd go visit him, and I was watching all these planes, the trails were modifying into clouds. It didn't dawn on me. It was like 10 years later, people start talking about chemtrails and stuff. I was going, it's just, that stuff's just being modified. Something's happened to the atmosphere. Of course, I've learned a lot since then, but, and now we know we've got information from Dan Widgington at Geoengineering Watch, and which we'll be seeing at some point here. There's no doubt that they're manipulating the clouds. And with the changeover, sun going into grand solar minimum, increase in cosmic radiation, the clouds no longer have a beautiful countenance. Everything's twisted, angry. You get little pockets of good stuff. And then down the lower right is my dear old late friend, Trevor Constable, the etheric rain engineer. Trevor was chief radio officer for Matson Lines, a shipping container that pretty much controls everything in and out of Hawaii. And they allowed him to do weather engineering experiments on his ship. He was a member of Borderland Sciences when I was a director there in the 80s and 90s. One of our other members was Bob McCullough, who was Wilhelm Reich's cloudbuster assistant on the Orop Desert operations in Tucson in the 1950s. So they had gotten together and advanced Wilhelm Reich's work of cloudbusters up to the geometric stage. And the reason I put this in here is in contrast to the chemtrails. My first experience with Trevor's work real time was Operation Pincher 2 in 1986, where he filed with National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that he was going to make it rain on July 29th in LA. And he filed this probably 6 weeks in advance, and how he was basically going to bring the moisture up the coast and up from the Gulf of California over the Banning Pass, meet up over LA, and make it rain, and it did. But what he found out in these rainmaking operations is the air quality would get better. The smog was disappearing. So he did an operation called Operation Clincher, which we recorded and published on, and we've got videos of this. He predicted he was going to get rid of the smog during the worst smog situation in LA in July. And sure enough, he did it with his little geometric devices. And it was pretty funny. George Fishbein, he was a weatherman in LA. Some of you guys may have seen him. And he goes, wow, you can't believe it, the air. He says, you can breathe the air. We've got the clip of this off the TV. He said, I got to tell you a funny story. He said, because this is LA, worst smog in the world at the time, I guess, considered maybe Beijing. He said the Air Quality Management District had flown in like 40 scientists from around the world to study smog. And they just happened to be there the week that Trevor was running Operation Clincher, and there was no smog for him to study. Now, they spent $4 million flying them in. Trevor made the smog disappear with a budget of $4,000 using sacred geometry and knowledge of the etheric forces. So we do have technologies to heal this. This is why we're into the bioarchitecture here. I work with Juan Schlosser here, our bioarchitect. We're looking at different ways of water treatment, energetic devices for the atmosphere, for plants. So this is where we're actually pursuing this as a real science to counter what's obviously some massive global, heavens knows. We'll have a look at that in a bit, where they might be coming from. The plant microbiome. Functions of the plant microbiome are essential for the host. And just like we've got the microbiome all through us, the plants do too. They're essential in photosynthetic functions, connections with the, it's hard to even know where the microbiome ends in the plant and goes into the soil microbiome. So anyway, the dominant ones are bacteria and fungi, absolutely integral to plant nutrition, plant immunity. So the plant microbiota and the plant, they collectively call what we call a holobiont. There's no single plant. It's part of a bigger field. It's connected. And what's interesting is that this Suzanne Simard's work up at the University of British Columbia on plant communications, she's shown you they do like radioactive tagging, like carbon-13 of, put like a bag on a tree, and then they actually trace through the forest over time. And what they find is that the plants send nutrients to other plants. There's interspecies communication, definitely, but what the main ones that get fed are their own biological offspring. The plants nurture their young. There's intelligence there. Remember the bacteria that were altruistic, that were dying? And I forgot to mention that on the fungi too, is that they're yeast cells. They'll actually, if yeast colonies run out of stuff to eat, basically they go into this apoptosis stage and 95% of them die off. So the other 5% can eat that and survive until they come back. So there's this amazing intelligence operating at all these different levels. Plant intelligence, well, I covered a little bit of that already. So theory of smart plants may explain the evolution of global ecosystems. So they're finding plants can actually make decisions and, collectively move, just as roots can move. If you watch films of roots, they're like primitive invertebrates moving through the soil. They're actually like seeking out and looking around, and they'll find like a nutrient pocket. They'll go towards it, then they'll sit there and absorb that. So it's not that these things just shoot out like dumb little things. They're very intelligent, and they have to be aware in order to be intelligent. Plants perform accurate and very sophisticated arithmetic calculation to prevent starvation at night. These are basically titles of scientific papers I've been going through. Plant roots use sound to locate water. Trees have a heartbeat, right? They pulse. They go to sleep at night. And electromagnetic radiation in our society is killing plants and trees. So we're basically decimating the natural world, which is very alive, very integrated with us. So we need to figure that out. So what is a plant? That's a good thing. I've studied Goethe's work, Metamorphoses of Plants. Goethe said, the metamorphoses of plants is the process by which one and the same organ presents itself to us in manifold forms. So what is a plant, right? We can look, okay, well, we see these plants here, but is that the whole plant? Like we look at a human or a dog or something, all our organs are there, all our cells are there from when we're small to when we're big. Some of them go through a little modification through puberty and old age and things, but basically they're all there. We don't grow new organs pretty much along the way. The plant has only one organ. The plant starts as a seed, comes out as a shoot. The shoot is just the cotyledons, which is and then the stem comes out, and then these leaves come out of it, but they're not inside anywhere. It's a metamorphoses. And it goes up into basically the corolla, which is the sepals and petals, and then flowers, goes back to seed. So Goethe was trying to understand plant morphology. Where's this coming? Like modern science, they just cut it apart, put it on a microscope, try to figure this all out from the DNA, then they try to manipulate it, completely backwards thinking. Basically, Goethe's method is what we call a participatory method. He's worked with color theory as well. Like he took one look through a prism and couldn't believe that people believed Newton, that color came out of light, because it doesn't. And anybody that's ever experimented truly with prisms and an open mind will know that light does not contain 7 colors. Colors manufactured by the prism where light and darkness come together. But in that theory, then again, that's another lecture. But what the point of that is the sun basically draws us outward to participate, and we draw the sun inward. This is how Goethe saw it, this participatory method. And this is how he looked at plant morphology, that our mind is on par with nature. That this is basically, the phenomenon itself is calling forth our inner being. That's what we're here for. This is what science is. It's not chopping stuff up and measuring things and all that. It's about what satisfies the human soul and allows it to progress and integrate itself in with the processes of this beautiful, magnificent creation that we live within. So so like the roots of the living phenomena, archetypally, are reflected in the roots in our mind. And it's quite interesting because I studied the Vajrayana. It's very similar sort of concepts in the mandala moving in and out, the reflection between subjective and objective. So we see the world not just phenomenally, which we have to in order to process it, but also archetypally to see through. So basically he saw the world, there's only one plant, the vegetative surface of the planet. Everything's going through these metamorphoses. And there's different ways, and that's why I put this one image up here of the whole plant world, the plant tree. It's kind of a cool image. But I'm going to play this little video here, which is from, it's just a real short one, of David Attenborough. And this is the plant world as it evolved through time. So what we'll see is basically all the green stuff is just basically non-flowering plants. Some come, go. We're basically looking at geological timeline coming up. And the flowering plants appeared about the middle of the Mesozoic and spread out, so you see this sort of flowering pattern. So I'll just click on that. So see some of them already dying out early on in geological, so it's still back in the Paleozoic era. 300 million years, that'd be, Carboniferous back in there, the coal bed stuff. So we'll be going into the Mesozoic era of dinosaurs, and that's when flowers start. So the red part is flowers, flowering plants, angiosperms. And if we actually look at it, data processing of the actual historical data of plant types in the geological record, we can graph it out as a plant itself. So we look at not just the current state of the plant world, but overall, it is a plant. This is this whole basis of this. So it takes a while. You can't really soundbite your way into the metamorphoses of plants, but it is, Steiner basically used it. He said the two things that are essential for the spiritual science is polarity and metamorphoses. And we find the polarity in Goethe's color theory and the metamorphoses in his plant world. And I think that if we look deeper into the microbiome, the pleomorphism, we look at it in this metamorphic state. I'll be honest, some of the people talking here know a lot more about some of this stuff than I do. I'm more like a librarian. I just know where a lot of pieces are, so I'm trying to string everything together. These are ideas for larger research projects we'd like to do through the New Earth University over time. Plant intelligence, I always like this, elephants painting self-portraits. And scientists have captured chimpanzees performing a bizarre ritual. Primate archaeologists say that chimps are going through their own Stone Age. Right? Gorilla youngsters seen dismantling poachers' traps. Very confident 4-year-olds outsmart hunters and protect their clan. They're actually clever enough. We've seen intelligence from the slime molds on up. It's at every stage there's intelligence and awareness, from the mineral on through. Ants bring flower petals to cover dead bumblebee in what looks like a funeral. This is amazing. And there was an old thing about the telling of the bees. So this is an ancient custom. If bees were not put into mourning, terrible misfortunes befell the family and the person who bought the hives. It was bad luck to buy or sell hives because when you sell one, you sell your luck with the bees. So bees were bartered. So if bees flew into a house, they were like an omen, somebody would call. So there's actually a number of cases where, in the past, where a bee owner would die and nobody would do anything to the bees, and the bees wouldn't produce. And it wasn't until they'd go and actually drape them in black, which is what this little picture represents here, that the bees were put into mourning, and then they'd come back into their normal biological processes, that there actually is this interconnection between them. And bees can understand a symbolic language for mathematics. Not only can our fuzzy little flower friends perform basic arithmetic, scientists have now discovered they can recognize symbols associated with numbers. And also, whale intelligence continues to amaze and dumbfound scientists. That's whale sounds. put into a circular form. They're communicating that high density information that's in like dolphin and whale. There's more information than 3D TV, 3D high definition TV. And also too, the whale songs are changing, right? There's something happening. And of course, they're all living electric environment, sonar. We're destroying their world. It's really sad. And there's also a number of cases, actually, octopuses stealing cameras and following. There's so much of that. I just want to put a little bit in. The animal microbiome, this is interesting. Naked mole rats defy the biological law of aging. And what they find, world of animal models, naked mole rats are supermodels, rarely get cancer, resistant to some types of pain, can survive up to 18 minutes without oxygen. They don't age, very active DNA repair, and high levels of chaperones, proteins that help other proteins fold correctly. Few age-related degenerative changes. It goes on, because of the microbiome that they have. So this is really where we can see science going as far as this. So, and as far as shaping behavior, animal microbiome, right? And this one bug here, right? Behavior shape symbiont acquisition, right? And then animals may adjust the microbiota at different life stages, right? So they can eat different things to change their microbiome, showing there's some sort of intelligent interaction with it. And squids eject bioluminescent bacteria daily. See, so they basically can control their population. And animals, spiders can fly hundreds of miles using electricity. You know, Darwin noticed this when he was out off the Galapagos, you know, a couple hundred miles or something, and there's spiders landing on the ship, right? And they found that they basically fly using electricity. Brains of birds synchronize when they sing duets. It's amazing what they find. Octopus and squid evolution is officially weirder than we ever thought. So octopuses, squid, cuttlefish, they can edit their own RNA to adapt to their environment. So, and I put this other picture up to represent, we're killing the animals off. There's, you know, back in 98, you get bugs on the windshield. I got them all my life until then. Now it's like hardly any bugs. You see one or two fireflies out here. I understand you used to see like thousands of them. You have one or two, hey, look, a firefly. So the bugs are dying off. The animals were in the sixth mass extinction on the planet. It's sad, and it's hard to say. A lot of it's being caused by humans, but it's also a cosmic cycle. Interrelations of plants. So mutualism, plants live mutually. Animals. We see in the middle clownfish and sea anemones. They're basically symbiotic. They live together. But if you look real close, and this is our good friend Carolyn Tyler, who's underwater photographer, she took this, and if you look inside the mouth of the fish, you see a couple eyes peering out. It's got a parasitic tongue fish that gets in there, and it eats the tongue, and it replaces it, and gets some of the food coming in. So there's mutualism and parasitism all within the same picture. And there's just quite a number of other things. You know, we know about bees, but it's just so interesting how, like orchids and bees, you know, the certain ones, this create like sex pheromones to attract them in, to repollinate, the complexity. There's evolution. I don't know, it's just hard to believe how any of these things ever evolve. I'm going to move forward a bit because I still got a few to go here. I realize time's... Human Microbiome Project says human body has 100 trillion microscopic life forms living in it. Now, it's very common to say, you know, well, we're only 10% human, and with gene expression, we're only 1% gene expression. I've heard from all the experts all over, so where do you find that at? Who's actually doing it? And I found the latest study. Scientists bust myth that our bodies have more bacteria than human cells. A reference man, 20, 30 years old, 1.7 meters tall, contains average about 30 trillion human cells, 39 trillion bacteria. Well, that's just bacteria. But anyway, they're saying that the ratio is the 10 to 1 myth persisted from a 1972 estimate by microbiologist Thomas Luckey, which was elegantly performed, yet was probably never meant to be widely quoted decades later. Right, so everybody says it, but where is the actual research? Well, I don't think they really know. The numbers could be anywhere around, but it's kind of like 10%, we got 10%. I always like to talk to people, they go, well, you know, we only use 10% of our brains. I go, speak for yourself. And I just use this just to show the interconnection of things. Bacteria, archaea, virus, eukaryota, which is fungi. This is operating as a single organ within our system. You know, we're not singular individuals, but superorganisms ourselves, comprised of human and non-human elements. The microbiome determines, the interactions with this determines who we are. You know, our digestion, immune system functions, cognition, what our moods are, everything is controlled by the microbiome. And they're basically regulating gene expression as well. So it is actually dominant. It's far more dominant than humans in that. And of course, there's epigenesis. We know then these things aren't doing it themselves. They're operating in flows with cosmic flows. And also, we need to look at how these things operate together. Like I say, when the bacteria come together, they operate as a colony. So where's the field? Is this a morphogenetic field, as Sheldrake would have said? Or I've just got more questions than answers. But it is interesting here. I was talking about the skin bacteria on us. We have about 500 bacteria living on our skin. 10 species predominate, accounting for approximately 50%. But what was interesting about some of the other species with smaller populations is they were host-specific. We could only identify them on a single host. It is entirely possible that everyone could have a unique bacterial signature. So you've got microbes on you that nobody else has, probably constructed from somatids or microzymas, because this is how these things come through. So we look at it, our genome's deeply affected by the microbiome via microRNAs, crosstalk between them. So there's messenger RNAs, microRNAs. Messenger RNAs help gene expression. The microRNAs sort of downregulate that and shut it off. But what they're finding is that's in food too. So they're contained in microvesicles called exosomes. And exosomes are very similar to viruses. In fact, in Trends in Microbiology, there was one paper, they even suggested that viruses may be hijacked exosomes, to use those words. So again, we're seeing the pleomorphism, the change. There's no distinct lines between these things, which again, when we're looking at things like vaccination, it just shows how much more idiotic that looks in the range of this larger picture here. It also means that GMO foods, are basically alter our gene expression in ways, that there's been no risk assessment. We have no idea. They're just monkeying around with this stuff. People say, well, people have been doing it all the time. That's how they, hybrids. But hybrids is not GMO. GMO is genetic disruption, which is a big difference from hybridization. And psychobiotics, I'm going to move real fast through these. Just we know sixth sense are, they're basically the microbes control our moods. And viral DNA was incorporated into our DNA millions of years ago. It's implicated in mental disorders. So again, some neuroparasitology is what I wanted to cover, and hopefully we'll wrap up after this. Long-term behavioral manipulation of the host, contrary to well-being. Over 50% of all organisms on Earth are parasites. They're totally interacted. Alex, parasites get insects high on drugs, start deadly mass orgy. You gotta love the headline writers at the science mags. They must be sitting around all day waiting for these things. Parasite drugs its host with a psychedelic chemical in shrooms. Basically psilocybin and cathinone. There's fungus in the cicadas, and it does it. So I got real interested in parasites years ago. The neuroparasitology, there's parasites, multi-species parasites, like these flukes. They act as a worm in mud, and then a snail eats them, and then the snail goes into water, and a fish eats the snail, and the thing goes up in the snail's brain, bunch of them acting in concert, like it was some kind of field. It cuts down starts metabolizing the serotonin, so there's less of that, and increases the dopamine. So things like it's on crack or something, goes up, starts flapping around on the top of the water. The bird sees a meal, goes down, eats it, the thing breeds in birds. It's got to get it in the birds to breed. But it needs all three species in order to do it. So there's a lot of these multi-species parasites. And one of the ones I put here, the cordyceps, the ant with a thing growing out of its head. Cordyceps is quite interesting. It's these things, they modify gene expression, but also the cordyceps is ergotine, right? These things, basically the neurotoxins are sitting in between neurotransmitters and psychedelic drugs. And so these things are modifying the behaviors. So what happens to humans? Toxoplasmosis. Now toxoplasmosis, it breeds in cats, it gets in mice, and I remember this when I was young, seeing mice running around like, cat litter things, and when cat catches them, thinking, that's odd. What's wrong with them? Well, because when they have toxoplasmosis, they're actually sexually attracted to cat urine. They've done all the tests on this stuff. Approximately 30 to 50% of the human population has toxoplasmosis, increases dopamine production, breaks down tryptophan, which is, of course, the serotonin metabolism pathway. They did studies of people with toxoplasmosis. Of course, they know they're all mostly schizophrenic, but they wanted to see what fetishes and things like that. So they found basically dominance, bondage and discipline. So people with toxoplasmosis are more likely to be into bondage and discipline, and have picked business school as a major. So we got schizophrenics that are into B&D and business. I'm thinking, these are the people running the system. I'm serious. Basically, high-speed motorcycle accidents, pretty good chance that person has toxoplasmosis. The military is very interested in this stuff because it causes reckless behavior, makes people brave, So there's something up with all this. And that's why actually the world burning here, that's actually toxoplasmosis bacteria. I've got burning the world there on that image as a representative. And there's no such thing as conscious thought. Where does our conscious thought come from? Scientists are saying decision-making may be surprisingly unconscious activity. And I've really meditated on this. You think about things, but the decisions seem to rise up from somewhere, and you can either agree or disagree, and then you keep on thinking, but you don't really make the decisions yourself. You think you do. And what's interesting is they find in neurological studies is that basically about 6 seconds before you make a decision, they can register your brain making the decision. Before you even had a chance to make it, it knows it. And they found they don't know where brain waves come from. They can't find it. They're just there. There's like no source. They're bouncing around somewhere, and they're doing stuff. And basically, and mind exists as field connected to the brain. Michael Persinger's work, Todd Murphy, Bruce Lipton's talking about that now, that our mind's basically in the cloud out here in the magnetic field of the Earth, and these are just our encrypted key USB thingies for connecting in. But then I love the work at the Heart Math Institute, electrophysiological evidence of intuition, the surprising role of the heart. The finding is the heart actually dominates over neurological activity, far stronger. And what they found is they had a test set up where people would be staring at a computer and they would push a button. And when they push the button, it registers any potential changes in their physiological activity of their heart. And when so they push the button and they get a reaction, and then the computer chooses a photo. Could be like a motorcycle accident or a beautiful flower or something like that. And what they find is the heart reacts to the picture and the theme of the picture before the computer even had a chance to choose what it is. So what, are we connected to some sort of space-time nexus within all of this through our heart, through the field, through the one potential? Cardiovascular response is marker of environmental stress caused by variations in geomagnetic field. Well, that doesn't surprise us anyway. We've kind of figured that out. We are made of light, scientific evidence. Our body literally glows with light, the biophotons. So, and basically they're looking at DNA as a source, and DNA is a fractal antenna in electromagnetic fields, and they're finding now optical communication channels in our brain with the biophotons. I'll do a couple quick ones because I think my time is up here. Electricity in the biosphere. Brainless embryos suggest bioelectricity guides growth. I hate scientists, but sometimes their information comes in good. They're cutting the brains out of like embryos growing, and then they're finding that it's actually bioelectricity is basically making them grow. So this middle chart is basically birth rhythms and electrification in like Spain. Basically, when they started electrifying the planet, it changed the birth rhythms, right? And then we got the cell phone. Are you in your cell phone, right? It's like your cell. Everybody's trapped in their cell. Because, we are electric entities. It's all around us. Our mobile phones are destroying our digestive systems because the first line of defense is our microbiome. I'm going to return here to Lily Kalisko's work, the one that was doing the crystallization with the solar activity at the beginning with the sun. Here's some other sun stuff. So up in the upper right, that's a standard gold chromatogram, just gold chloride that's crystallized up paper. The bottom ones are before, during, and after a solar eclipse in 1927. And it's hard to distinguish from here until you really get to read them, but basically what happens is when the moon's in front of the sun, the pattern's disrupted, and the one after was just after. It hadn't fully reformed yet. The reason I put these here is she gave a talk, these were 1927, she gave a talk in 1964 to a group of anthroposophical physicians called Gold and the Signs of the Times. And she said, starting in the 1950s, she said, the gold wasn't crystallizing properly anymore. These warp patterns were happening all the time. And she couldn't figure out what was happening. She was really worried about it. And of course, that basically matches the birth rate electrification. It's not hard to figure out what happened. They started electrifying the planet. So it's actually cut us off from our cosmic sources, from the ancient alchemical thought that connected us with the planets and the metals within our system and all these reactions. Now we're getting this, and it's getting weird. It's getting weirder and weirder. We know about the 5G. 5G's like the wake-up call. It's electricity itself. As Steiner said, electricity, once for all, is not intended to work into the realm of the living. It is not meant to help living things especially. It cannot do so. You must know that electricity is at a lower level than that of living beings. Whatever is alive, the higher it is, the more it will tend to ward off electricity. It is a definite repulsion. If now you train a living thing to use its means of defense where there's nothing to ward it off, the living creature will thereby become nervous, fidgety, and eventually sclerotic. That's not totally true. It's mostly true overall with the electrification, but what they found, like Goldsworthy found in his research on weak electromagnetic fields on the human system, to certain degrees, certain weak pulse fields, there is a degree where it can enhance growth and it can help heal. But overall, the mass electrification is basically killing us and killing the planet. What about space? We didn't cover space other than the connections. Something very strange happens to our genes in space. Mice given space salmonella, this one here. Going to space increases DNA methylation, a process for turning on and off genes. We've seen thousands of genes change how they are turned on and off as soon as an astronaut gets into space. Mice given space salmonella start to die 2 days earlier and at lower doses than normal. Something happens to microbes that leave planet Earth. Behavior is unpredictable. Dormant viruses activate during space flight. Beings not made for space. In space, heads swell. Astronauts have trouble eating and sleeping. Eyeballs of at least some astronauts become somewhat squashed. Vision shifted. Beings aren't made for space. So we'll go back to cosmological botany here. I mentioned the archetypal plant. Well, where is the archetypal plant? It's the way that the planets move from Earth is plant morphology. The monocotyledons is the Sun-Mercury synodical period, and the dicotyledons is Venus-Sun. So basically the plant is a planetary organism. There's much more. I'm not going to go into too much detail because sort of reached the end of my time, I think, and we need to move on. But just to show these connections are there. And here's all the different planets and the plant species that they reflect into. So we will be doing more on this. I'll do a workshop on this all as a full subject at some point. So these are just a review of a wide range of subjects, trying to look at this whole kind of concept of global consciousness, global superorganism. We're connected in. We're like anthropic consciousness nodes within it. We're not individuals at all. that's just human ego, which is basically what destroys. And I mean, you have to have a certain amount of ego because you need integrity of system to stay alive. But that which overcomes and natural processes is basically it, is not the way to go. So we can see Earth is a living organism whose life is interwoven spiritually with the life of the heavenly bodies in the solar system and the realm of the stars. And basically, if we follow that pathway, the future is dazzling. Thank you.